famous duo had what I would call an uncomfortable relationship. If they seem like they're not warm and fuzzy, it's because they're not. I don't want you to start singing Side by Side or You Got a Friend or any of that, because it is not true. De Gaulle, who had been associated with Marshal Pétain, about whom much later, was in fact going to depart after the establishment of the Vichy regime and decide that he was going to be a kind of French leader, because he didn't have any sort of mandate, far from it. But since he was going to take the position of being anti-German, then of course that famous cigar smoker right by him was only too happy to pick up on him despite whatever feelings he may have had. Because my sense is, for those who were quote unquote Anglo-Saxon, this individual, Charles de Gaulle, was a tough pill to swallow. I think the word is haughty and difficult, and there are a variety of other words that are used to describe him. But he came to there, declared a traitor by the French government, as we will see. He sort of establishes his own government. And since the British are still in the war and the French are not, de Gaulle is declared a traitor to the French government. And of course, it's back and forth. And now we declare you a traitor. So there's not like we can come together and pan French or any of that. It's going to be de Gaulle without a lot of support, because remember, the Free French movement is going to be very slow in growing. That is one of the, I guess, common errors. People often think, oh, everybody is just waiting to join up and we're already getting excited about D-Day in 1940. I don't think so. It will take a long time for all the groups to coalesce behind him. And of course, his appearances on dear old BBC in French. And of course, this will include various gifts who are not necessarily favorites of de Gaulle, like the communists. But let me tell you something about the communists. Everybody remembers the Soviet-German non-aggression pact. I know you'd never remember that. So it's still in effect. And what does that mean, Comintern lovers? Well, that means that suddenly hating the Germans? Oh no, we love our German friends. They're great people. Misunderstood, yes, but we invited them to share in maybe some of our borscht and coming out the whole routine of the Germans and Soviets. And then, of course, that puts, if you're a French communist and you used to be, we hate Hitler, and then suddenly, well, maybe he's not as bad as we thought, you know. I think some serious revisionism. And it's painful when you have to be a revisionist because, you know, you like to talk bad about him. And now you have to say, maybe he's not as bad as we thought. Yeah, you can't imagine how wonderful it'll be in June of 41 when the Germans invade the Soviet Union. I mean, if you were a young communist, you know, and maybe you had a junior Comintern group going, and you could suddenly, that day after the German invasion of the Soviet Union, you go, yes, I can now say the things I really think about Germany. But at this point, it's very hard to get all these French elements behind de Gaulle. But there is the ever stoic Winston Churchill, now British Prime Minister, saying we'll take what we can get. Because, of course, even though de Gaulle does not really have a movement yet, he is a very prominent Frenchman, and he is taking a leadership of an anti-German group, because when you think about Vichy, and I do a lot, there is no way that the British are ever going to say, you know, they're not so bad. No, as far as Churchill is concerned, they're unacceptable because they had compromised with the Germans. And obviously, for the British, there will be no compromise. As Frank has pointed out, we're not even in the war at this point. And so what the American policy is going to be in this matter is very different. And here he is, the symbol of the Vichy world. And yes, I think this is what we call propaganda today, or if you're in the business, I guess you call it publicity. I mean, there are all kinds of terms because we're so accustomed to all these kinds of things nowadays, aren't we? That we're hardly surprised that this regime is going to begin the process of gaining support, because everyone associated with this, from Marshal Pétain on down, is going to say, you know, really, we're in this fix because we had it coming. Yeah. I mean, it's not like it's just the Germans invaded and they had better military strategy. No, it's because our government was so awful. We were divided people, you know, liberals versus conservatives, if you will, right versus left. And we had the regime, and so now we've gotten it bad. And what are we going to have to do? I guess you might put this in theological terms: repent and turn it around. The national revolution. And you're going like, oh, 1789. No. En français, fermez la bouche. Shut your mouth. No, 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 no. Don't you talk about 1789. You get that Listerine. Yeah, you can't do that either. I think the idea is the national revolution is to bring back the traditional and get away from any pinkoism. Yeah. You know, any of these ideas that they consider to be, you know, Marxist or revolutionary. We want the good ways of the past. I don't think we want to go back to the Estates General, not that far back, but we want tradition and we want all of the good ways, the way it used to be. I think there's certain amount of nostalgia, but there is also a feeling that the defeat by the previous government is our fault. They view Pétain, hero of the Battle of Verdun, as a national treasure. He was just called the Marshal, and there were other marshals, but I don't think anyone would ever have any problem in identifying him. Oh, you mean Pétain is a marshal? I mean, you all, I'm not going to send you to be on a quiz show, so don't be nervous. But you know Foch and you know other marshals. I mean, it's like when you think of the general, who would you think of? I don't know, MacArthur, Eisenhower, I don't know. But I'm saying that in this case, he had been idolized up to the level of this kind of super marshal, maybe. But that serves as the symbol of a man now 84 years old. So now I love this advertisement because it makes me think of a place that some of you you may have been there, but you may well have been to our own American Hot Springs. And every time I think of Hot Springs, Arkansas, I think of Vichy. And you think, why would you think of that? Well, because they're limited activities, highly limited. Those of you who are big Manhattan people, you like to go to big shows, big stores. Yeah, or Chicago. Vichy probably is not your kind of place. You probably need to stay in Paris. But Vichy, like Hot Springs, you're going for health reasons. You say, wow, so everybody's going? No. You have to have money in addition to health problems, okay? So it's good. I mean, it's good to have money. I think we will recognize that. And so it's tourism, but the idea of you going for the springs, for the spa, but while you're there, you can maybe gamble. Yeah, they have gambling, but people who've been to Hot Springs know that they have places of evil there too. Yeah, I mean, Sin City, I mean, you can go into this. So the idea of Vichy was to pleasure yourself and all kinds of bad activities. Some of you, and we're not going to raise hands, have been to places like Las Vegas, Reno, and you say, oh, that's terrible. Yeah. But nothing on that level. I told you 25,000 went, and that's without the tourists. And we're counting on the people coming in, and this, of course, would represent the trains, 4-hour trip from Paris. Of course, not the trains of now. I'm sure you understand. When I took a train ride from, I think it was Paris to Bordeaux, God, it was just amazing, you know, how fast it all seemed. But I assume this was the 1930s when this advertisement, and you see this particular area that is pictured above the train. And of course, you know, the grand hotels, and then gambling and all kinds of activities that are not spoken of here. But let's just say it is not there to go to extra church services. Okay, so this is pretty. And you notice if you want to go on, you go to a city where we used to take Auburn students in the French program, Clermont-Ferrand. Believe it or not, yeah, right when you were students. That was a university program in French. It really was. I don't know why. I asked my colleagues in French, I guess, why it was that they decided to move on, but they did that for a number of years in foreign languages. So that university, so it's not far from Vichy, but they're not necessarily connected. They just happen to be in central France. And you go like, well, I'd rather go to Marseille. I'd rather go to Paris. And France is a large country. But this is where people go. And believe you me, they had some very important tourists, starting with the Empress of Napoleon III, Eugénie. And she and her group, what would you call them, socialites or, you know, people of wealth and power. They would go there and party and have a nice time and presumably take the baths and feel better. So you see all that. I thought it was interesting when it was called the thermal capital. Yeah, thermal head. So that's supposed to, oh, and I feel so good. Well, yeah, but you gambled and you drank, and you met people of ill repute. That was part of what you did. Are you proud of yourself? You know, that kind of thing. So it's not like you're going for a retreat to find the Lord. No, this is definitely quite worldly, but it's nothing more or less than that. But that's how they chose the capital, because for those behind Pétain, it's quiet. We're not going to be here long because remember, we're going to Paris. Oh, I know we have the unpleasantness with the Germans, but they'll move on because they're about to conquer Great Britain, you know, next month or two. I mean, go back and read the papers last year when everybody thought the Ukrainians were going under. And now that's exactly what happens here. It was all meant to be temporary. And why there? I think it was because that's more or less what the Germans had decided, and because we have space for the government. If you'll recall, they had been way over in Bordeaux on the coast. That is to say, the French government. You say, what happened to the records? Most of the records, you may imagine, had been destroyed when they left Paris to go south. And the records they had then were shifted from Bordeaux to Vichy. And all the government bureaucrats, pencil pushers, whatever you want to say, they went with it. And where do they stay? Well, they stay in the hotels and all of those places. And what's going to happen with government offices? Well, you got casinos, don't you? Yeah. It's all of that space, folks, of a resort. So what if a resort is no longer a resort or temporarily not a resort? Then we have all that space to use, and that's exactly what will happen. It's a very interesting phenomenon to me. This is an example. Almost looks like a church, doesn't it? But it was a major government building. And you can go and see all these things. I remember many years ago, probably the late 70s, I went to Vichy and I saw these fellas about my age now, and they were playing, what is that game that they like to play over there, groups of men? Well, whatever it was, they were playing some sort of, yeah, like that. And I said, that's exactly right. And so, of course, I said, gentlemen, I wonder if I could ask you some questions about 1940, because I'm so interested. They didn't appreciate it. I'm afraid I was the ugly American, because I had a lot of areas that I wanted to discuss, promised extra credit, or, I'll eat at your restaurant if you'll tell me about your relationship with the Germans, or, woo, not a good question. Yeah, not a good question at all. So I got the Ugly American Award that year. Definitely. I didn't mean to. I just thought it was interesting. But what I think is interesting and what regular folks think interesting are two different things. Anyway, obviously, this is a photo from Vichy's, but I thought it was interesting to see how these various buildings, like this one, were turned over, because it's not only the executive, but you got the legislative here too, and they're all moving there. Now, obviously, not everybody who was in Bordeaux is going to go to Vichy. There were lots of people who had been associated with the fall of the Third Republic, who are going to sort of say, I don't want to be involved in this. This Vichy experiment then is not 100%, but that doesn't mean, on the other hand, that everybody is going to be behind de Gaulle. It's going to be more wait and see. Let's pick the side that we think is going to be presented. Okay, more propaganda. And instead of fraternity, equality, and forth, we're going to have work and the patrie, the nation. And you said, does that mean liberty, fraternity, equality is out of style? Yeah, I think you could pretty well accept that we got a new threesome. Again, work and family. And so if you're thinking we're getting back to the old days, you are very right. So that is what we've got going. And of course, symbolized by Pétain, who, one author I remember saying, is more important as a symbol than a reality. Doesn't that sound weird? But it's really true. I mean, it's like he's it, the grand old man. We love our marshal, and we want to. I think there's so many people in history, thank you, and he's only one of them, who can't measure up to the idealism. But that's so true of all of them, isn't it? It's like the idea of, oh, yeah, Churchill. I mean, God, Americans keep that whole tourism. Business going, right? Even t-shirts, cars, right? But we all know he's the symbol, family, and the nation. In German hands. And so the Vichy French under Pétain, but with the government led by Admiral Darlan, about, we're talking late 1940, early 1941, are going to have to deal considerably with the man in the middle. And that is Otto Abetz. And he was, as I say, before the war, he had some sort of group called Association of Franco-German Friendship. And It's like, so the whole bit, I mean, it's like Francophiles Anonymous. I mean, probably, chapters in Berlin and Dresden and everywhere. It's like very, very interesting how his career would work out for him. However, as always, Admiral Darlan had competition. The individual, what do we say, greasy, oily, all of the above, he's right there behind, both figuratively and literally. Pierre Laval. He had been actually from that neck of the woods, the area of Clermont and Vichy and over that way. But he was a climber. He had been involved in the Third Republic government. You remember, foreign minister, premier, kind of like Taylor said, they just bounce around in one government to the next, and there are always enough seats for everybody to get a seat. So Laval had been in many governments, but now, once this Vichy regime, he wants a place, and he wants a big place. Admiral Darlan is his more popular rival, but it will be true that Laval is waiting. Laval is more of what I would call opportunist or individual, who, to use that word, collaborationist, because personally, I've never felt Admiral Darlan necessarily liked either the British or the Germans. He may have accepted the fact that they would have to work in the German environment, but Laval was definitely ready to do some serious kowtowing, shall we say. And he will come into that position of chief minister of Pétain. Now, how much is Pétain outdoing this? And again, he's in his mid-80s. So, and again, you would notice he's back in uniform. I think it's interesting, sort of going back and forward. Those of you who've been in the military will appreciate that. It's, I don't know if this is something that he will do. And of course, there is his great honor there. It's only a award that he has on right there. And of course, the famous salute, and people loved all that. So wherever he was, whether it was in Midtown, Vichy, or anywhere else, of course, Pétain would always draw crowds because people enjoy those kinds of things. And it was considered good for morale, I guess. So you see these, the bijou, and up there, kind of to the right of Laval's greasy head. You see that up there? It's very interesting, and I'm sure that despite all the changes, that you could probably see signs. But again, this must again have been, say, sometime during 41. You say, but I thought that Darlan was number 2. Well, he was, but these things come and went, because we're dealing with a pretty short period of time, if you think about it, 40 to 44. Another thing, I think this is so pretty, and if you're looking at it, you're thinking, but is pretty outside the same as pretty inside? Indeed not. Because what do you think is inside? Well, I'll tell you what. Gambling. Wheels. Where she goes, nobody knows. I mean, yeah, people are losing money and staying up too late. But all of that, but nice gardening, pretty flowers, but all of this would have been major assemblages, because if you ever thought about it, do you know there was actually a Soviet embassy there? Now, that's something you won't find out anywhere. I mean, yeah, special information in case anybody ever asks you. Yeah, the embassy kind of closed down in June of 41, you know, like feelings. Your buddies, your German buddies are coming to Moscow, and that hurts our feelings. But it seemed like a good idea at the time, shall we say, that everybody's coming to Vichy, not the British. But if you were on the right side of the Germans, then you probably have representatives in Vichy during this short period. So what I'm getting at is all of these buildings, whether casinos, hotels, are taken over for the usage of the government. And if you just happen to be involved in these kind of activities, good luck, because I'm sure it's all back now, because frankly, it's just one of those resort towns. There's nothing else to do. I mean, it's not like there's some business or industry coming to town. This is just all about the spa and people enjoying themselves. And again, this hotel, and you see them there, group shot, Admiral Darlan. See him now, he's in uniform. And there is Laval, the white tie. Oh, yes. Somebody could have really helped him with his wardrobe, right? Yeah. But he, so you understand that there is Pétain, and this is all being a sense of trying to promote the idea of unity and cooperation, but you understand behind the scenes, and when Pétain wasn't around, there's a lot of infighting. Now, I'm not saying that wouldn't happen in any government, but it's just this one seems particularly so, having to do not only with replacing Pétain, maybe taking over the government, but also, of course, should we go all the way in collaboration with the Germans? Now, as far as I'm aware, there were none who said, I don't know, I miss our British friends. I had some really nice letters from Churchill, and I hope to go back to London. I don't think there was any of that, because Pétain, for one, would remark to people, even Churchill before the fall of the Third Republic, you British did not help us one little bit. We ended up this way because even though we backed you up in the Great War, in this, you haven't helped us. So I think there was a sense of resentment, and the feeling among the Vichy French was more or less, if you suffer, it's really your own fault. So you deal with your own problems. In other words, I don't think on the part of the Vichy French there was any concern or like we should have done more to help our British friends. I don't think there was any of that at all. And as far as The British are concerned, of course, they've got de Gaulle to keep them active if they get lonely to have French around, which I doubt they did. July 1940. Now think about that, how fast all this goes on. Because the fall of the Third Republic was just June of 1940. So this is just July 4th. Winnipeg, that's an interesting choice of newspaper. I don't know how I happened to come with that one. I mean, Winnipeg's a nice town, but it's just that wish I could have found something from the New York Times, but I thought this was significant enough to think of the amazing and startling attack of the British on the French Navy. Because we always remember with the fall of the French government back in 1940, the French still have their Navy, a very large Navy, and they still have their empire in Africa and Asia. Sometimes we forget that. And you're just thinking, well, you've lost everything. Well, no, they haven't. They may not have all of France, but they've got all those territories in Africa and Asia. You ever thought about that? Indochina, for example. And as we know from Casablanca, right? They have Algeria, Morocco, all those territories. And then, oh my gosh, the French Congo and go south. So they have all those territories. Now, not all the territories are going to be maintained because in case of some of those territories, they will have French leaders who will be lured into supporting de Gaulle. But that's another story. As interesting as the French Empire is, I want to stick here to the fact that Churchill's government makes the decision, I guess with de Gaulle's acceptance, that they are going to bomb this part of the French Navy with great destruction. There will be 1,000 or more French sailor casualties. And it's like, we're sorry we had to do it, but we were too afraid that the Vichy folks were going to turn it over to the Germans. That would not be a decision that would be easy to make as far as the British were concerned, I suppose. Churchill and his government decided that that was the best thing for them to do. It did not destroy the entire French Navy, but with all of those lost lives. And again, people could say, and I would say, I mean, it's not those French had done anything wrong. It's just they are just the casualties of war. And we're destroying it. Would you say justifiable deaths? I mean, that's the way the British viewed it. Again, I remind you, the Americans are not associated with this because this particular activity in French Algeria in July 1940 will occur before the United States is involved. But yes, as you can see by the illustrations, it's pretty horrible, to say the least. And I'm sure I think the British would try to say, we're sorry we had to do this. And I'm not so sure that would make families feel any better about it. But, and it's not, so there's no way that they can say to the French, well, if you hadn't been involved with the Germans, we wouldn't have had to do this. But so I think this is what they call crossing the Rubicon, you know, as far as the relationship between the British and the Vichy French. The propaganda goes on. French people, you're neither sold nor betrayed nor abandoned. Come to me with confidence. No telling how much. Could you imagine if that had television back then? I know, it'd just be over and over. It was probably at the movies, though. I'm sure it was. You go to films, and they had films. I mean, they were making movies during the war. I actually saw a film one time when I was in New York. I mean, they used to, some of you remember, they used to have movie theaters where you could watch old movies. I think after cable and all the other things, they think they all shut down. But back in the day, I went to one and saw this amazing movie that was made, I think, in 1943, 44, a French film under German occupation. So there was a lot of that going on, and a lot of this kinds of like, we love you, and then maybe people would stand up or, you know, and like sing songs, not the Marseillaise so much, because that represents something else. Yeah, I think 1789. And we want good old days. Again, I don't think we want the Estates General. We don't want a king, but we're looking for a different society, and the Marshal represents the good old days. And so we love him. Je t'aime, je t'aime. So that's the idea. Again, I thought it was interesting that he's in civilian clothes, but maybe it's just me. I just think it's interesting that he would do that rather than his full uniform. But the propaganda is strong. There's a major unit. He goes on all kinds of trips to do the whole business, to raise, what would you say, national consciousness and dedication, regardless of what's going on with his government and its relationship with A, Nazi Germany, and B, Britain. Not to mention the Soviets. Because remember, that change is coming about in June of 1941. I know you won't forget that. That's the third time I brought it up. I can't help myself. It's like I lack self-control. But it's like that is so important. That is such a, I don't know, dividing line in terms of the way things are going to be. Like I said, if you had been, imagine, you're part of the Soviet embassy in Vichy, how you would have felt. Have you heard? The Germans are headed for Moscow. You think we better pack up and go home? Yeah, I think it's definitely time. Get the Samsonite. Yep, we need to start packing because the world is a-changing. I thought this was interesting. You see him now back in uniform. And what's he doing? He's welcoming trainloads of returning POWs. And you think, oh, there couldn't be that many. There were, though, many. And what a wonderful, I guess, for the Germans, asset to use against the Vichy government. We have them, you do what we want, and we'll give them to you. But it's the trickle. You're not getting them all. So a few here, a few there. It's more or less a long process, and a process that won't let up, at least during this particular period. The Vichy period, I mean, because there's so many, but you can see all these people, and it's a great delight. And you see the hand, it's the Vichy hand, the Pétain hand, greeting them. And of course, all that kind of thing would be very, very popular. And we're just in August of 1941. This is a slow process, but while it's happening, it moves rather fast, because this is the kind of thing that if you were worried about polls or evaluations, I would think this is very popular return of POWs, because just face it, French read a lot about this, about how I don't think the food was too good in the White House anyway, but and the idea of having to put up with him as a guest, but he was mighty happy, yay. But you can't say you're happy about Pearl Harbor, but I guess it brought us in, didn't it? So he was happy about that, and rather than attacking the Japanese, or rather than attacking the Germans in France, the decision was made to go into North Africa. All of this, of course, will be very important, and end, of course, with the French deciding they would destroy much of their own fleet. And of course, Admiral Darlan, who had enjoyed so much prestige and authority, and after competing with Laval, would be assassinated on Christmas Eve of 1942 in Northern Africa. The amazing thing about that whole assassination is that he was there to visit his polio-stricken son, which I think is a fascinating idea, that in that day and age, you know, because normally we think, or at least I do, polio in the 50s, not the 40s. And Admiral Darlan's son was probably in his 20s or older. But whatever, the elimination of Darlan is certainly a major event, even though it appears to us that the handwriting is on the wall for Vichy France, because even with or without Darlan, the Germans were not pleased with the actions of the Vichy government. It was not as if they thought the Vichy government was going to go to the British. It was more that they no longer seemed useful. So far from being ready to turn over the rest of France to the Vichy regime, the Germans decided by the end of 1942, as a matter of fact, to simply turn out the Vichy authorities and take over unoccupied France, and that they did. So it's like, didn't last very long, did it? When you think about, if you ever have, about how long did Vichy actually go on? Now, those games that we watched took place in 1943, but even after the occupation, the Vichy government was nominally there, but they were simply operating under German instructions. So it had no independence or pretense of being a national authority. Here he is, all of his awards and medals. Again, I think, as far as I'm concerned, Darlan is definitely not a British lover, but I don't think he's necessarily a German lover either. It's that the traditional French leader who was very ambitious and had great hopes of becoming Pétain's right-hand man and successor. But of course, his assassination ended there. This fascinates me because look at where we are. 1944. 1944. And of course, that means that we are getting close to D-Day. And you're going like, what's going on? Well, Pétain's more or less sort of acting on behalf of the Germans. I mean, I don't think he has much choice at this point because he has been taken. But in the spring, to honor people who had died at American and British hands through war, he went to Paris. And it fascinates me because everybody knows about June the 6th of D-Day. And you're thinking like, wow, a lot of different things that are going on before that. And it's true. Now, here we have a newspaper. So you see that up in the top right, April 27th. Things can change fast, can't they? So what is that article? Oh, Marshall acclaimed by the people of Paris. It's good to be popular. However, I don't know. Sometimes it can change. It definitely changed it. At Notre Dame, the chief of state, President Laval, and members of the government have attended the ceremony in memory of the French massacred by Anglo-Americans. Oh. So yeah, when you look at the newspaper, Mark, and there we go. I mean, yeah. So you're thinking this is a biased newspaper? Yeah, I think you can pretty well assume that, and maybe, and you just think how soon, what, 6 weeks before D-Day? Yeah, I mean, it just fascinates me how that will change. But he was visiting, would you say goodwill tour? Because I don't think he was free at this point. In fact, I know he wasn't. He was more or less doing whatever they wanted him to do because more or less the Germans had taken control of the government by the end of 1942. Because at first there was the thought of, the British and the Americans saying, we were there, we made this possible. And he said, And and you say, that's rather cheeky. Well, we are talking Charles de Gaulle, right? So you understand that you don't see any of the Americans. I will say this to him, though, there was all talk about his being assassinated. So I guess he was pretty brave to be doing that, but there must have been, like all public figures, a certain amount of daring do, and he went out there. And I guess you could even say that about Marshal Pétain back in April when he went in the similar situation in the streets of Paris. Now, I wonder if there were any people in both crowds. You mean hypocrites? You mean double dealers? Yeah, I bet you there were some people saying, yeah, we love you, Marshal. Yeah, you're so great. But you lost. So de Gaulle's the man. I don't know. It's an interesting thought, at least to me. And of course, don't forget the red, white, and blue. They're coming in, but they have to come behind. In addition to our wonderful British friends, now led by the labor leaders, as Churchill is, well, no, this is 1944, so Churchill is still in, but de Gaulle is running his own show. But it's very interesting to think that now the Marshal Pétain, was either under German confinement or he had already made his way to Switzerland, where I might add, he could have lived out his life because let's face it, at that stage, almost 89, he wouldn't have had that long, but he decided not to do it. In fact, he returned. And when he returned to France, willingly, he was put on trial. What we would call a capital trial because he was tried as a traitor. It's interesting that de Gaulle, who now had mysteriously been chosen by the French people as the new president of what would become the Fourth Republic, which would last until 1958, and they're still in their fifth, so yeah, we'll see. No sixth counting. But basically, we got this unfinished business, which is the matter of Pétain. And I believe when the trial started, he was 89, which is unbelievable, isn't it? So I did have this. Yeah.
This is the Palais de Justice, where Pétain, Marshal of France and hero of Verdun, is on trial for his life on charges of plotting against the internal security of his country and collaboration with the enemy. On the day before the trial, the Marshal arrived in the French equivalent of a Black Maria. He was taken in through the back door and then went to a specially prepared flat over the court where he's living during the trial. The windows were blocked to prevent any possible attempt on his life, and guards kept careful watch on the roof. And now the day of the trial itself. Special precautions had been taken, and additional guards were there to preserve order. They were certainly needed, as you'll see in a moment. In stifling heat, the packed court awaits the arrival of the accused. Among the chief witnesses for the prosecution were Albert Lebrun, President of the French Republic in 1940, and Paul Reynaud. There he is in the center. Then Pétain himself arrives in the 7-starred uniform of a Marshal of France and wearing only one decoration, the Médaille Militaire he received for his work in the last war. Now, at the end of another war, he stands trial for treason against the Republic. Outwardly, he is composed, but you can see by the way he handles his papers that inwardly he is greatly affected. After an adjournment, the clerk...
The judge was then about to question the accused when Pétain asked leave to speak. The request was granted, and the marshal made it clear that this was the only time he would speak. I shall make no further statement, he said. I shall not reply to a single question, for a Marshal of France asks mercy from none. After this statement, disturbances again broke out, and the court had to be cleared. And so ended the first day of the trial for treason of Henri-Philippe Pétain, the hero of Verdun.
I can only imagine folks screaming and carrying on. As you can imagine, the whole business of trying Pétain was unpleasant, but they achieved what they wanted, of course, which was to find him guilty and sentence him to death. However, de Gaulle decided to commute it to life in prison. Yeah, at 89, I don't think that's a problem. It lasted actually until 1951. He was confined to a facility in a small island off the coast of Western France. It is hard to imagine so okay, and yeah, we have a bit more. There we go.
The courtyard of the Palace of Justice in Paris, and the bricked-up window of Marshal Pétain's cell. The old man of Vichy, 89 years old, wearing the 7 stars of a Marshal of France on his sleeve and a single medal, faces his accuser. This is likely to go down as one of the memorable court scenes of the century. Lawyers for the defense battle for the old man's life. Chief prosecutor is 72-year-old André Monet. French politicians, many of them Pétain's accusers, sit in the crowded court. Among them are Paul Reynaud, Michel Clemenceau, and Monsieur Lebrun. Pétain refused to acknowledge the court's authority. In a firm voice, he read a statement and then refused to speak any further. Inside and outside the court, tempers ran high. Philippe Pétain, once the hero of his country, now faces a treason charge.
'45. So we can understand then that while perhaps we think of like, yeah, Truman and the bombing of Japan and so forth and so on, in this particular case, we're still back in France and Pétain is going down. All of the previous French leaders that were mentioned in the film testified against him. Some of them had actually been incarcerated because they were viewed as responsible for all the problems of the Third Republic. And they had caused the Republic to go down to the Germans. So I'm sure that we would say revenge is sweet. So now that's the end for Pétain, and he would die in 1951. Whether he was grateful to de Gaulle for allowing him to live, I'm really not sure, because the guillotine was definitely available in those times. All of that. Well, you know, if you were an insurance agent, I wouldn't be writing a life insurance policy on Laval in 1945. He's going fast, yes. So I'm thinking when he spoke, and there is Pétain behind him, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to miss you, Pierre. No, I don't think so. I don't think there was any bon ami there. Je t'aime, none of that. It is definitely like he blamed Pétain for a lot of the problems, and poor Admiral Darlan and so forth and so on. But he was gone, and that was the end of him in October of 1945. And it's interesting to see the execution. I mean, it's wham, bam. It doesn't take a lot, because he definitely did not have a lot of friends and supporters. This, despite the fact, another fun fact for you, he was on the cover of Time magazine in 1931. Bet you didn't know that. Yeah, fun facts. Put that in your blue book. Yes, you'll get extra points. This guy was absolutely amazing, because some of you may remember this, because this particular individual, Papon, and I thought I'd show the, at the time and then later, photographs of him, because he was Mr. Big Stuff at the top, and then the bottom is the times when he was basically going to be called to account. Maurice Papon was finally discovered, and he had served in Bordeaux during World War II and was associated with the Vichy government. But notice, 1990s. What had happened? Well, France, Fourth and Fifth Republics, had begun to deal with the issues of what had happened during the Vichy period, because during the de Gaulle years, there was a feeling like, that's just all so nasty. Let's just not bring it up. I mean, this fellow, Papon, had actually gotten a job. I mean, he was going to get a pension. We love our pensions, the bureaucrats, but the fact is that he did serve, and yet 3 years of a 7-year sentence. And so some of you may remember that because, in fact, it was a sensational event, and I thought I would mention it because it is the end of a period in which individuals were finally called to account for their misdeeds. And think how long that took. A long, long time. And think of how successfully he had maintained himself without being questioned on that basis. In other words, you have to be somebody big. Oh yeah, they got Pétain, they got Pierre Laval, people of that sort, your first rank. But to get on into the lower, and they did that, probably not as soon as they should have, or not all the layers of people, but they did a pretty good job. And the latest story, and you may have seen this, the current French leader, Macron, was actually going to honor Pétain for his military service. Oh, I know. Lord, they just raised Cain. And you know those French will do it. So that was the end of that. Fini, la fin. I mean, it wasn't going to happen. And Macron, ferme la bouche. He kept his little mouth shut after that. It's as if now the French have come to terms with the Vichy past and more or less decided that they want to have no further involvement with its honor of veneration. So we will start back next time, and we'll be talking about a country that we love because of Zsa Zsa Gabor. Yes, it's going to be all about goulash and the Gabor sisters. No, not really, but it is going to be about Hungary. So I look forward to seeing you all next time back in our regular home, the Auburn University. Thank you all. Thank you all. And thank you, Sherry, for the